Okay, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Elena Coates and I'm the Director of Exhibitions at the Pennsylvania College of Art and Design. Tonight is the last of a special speaker series that we've had this semester and is made possible by the gallery and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at PCA&D. We'll be taping tonight's talk for the college's archives, and it will be on the YouTube channel for the college for people to view afterwards. So feel free to use the chat box at the end, or I will release the microphone so that you can ask, since we're not a large group, we can ask the artist questions directly and have more of a direct Q&A after the presentation. First, I want to start off with a land acknowledgement statement, and I would like to say that PCA&D and the Lancaster County were founded on land that was traditional territory of the indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge the painful history of genocide and the forced removal throughout our country, and we honor and respect all indigenous peoples still connected to this land in which we gather. I would like to introduce to you our special guest speaker this evening. Nansi Guevara is a designer, artist, and teacher based in Brownsville, Texas, originally from Laredo, Texas. She holds a bachelor's in fine arts and design from the University of Texas at Austin, and a master's in education from Harvard University. She is currently focused on design, education, and community public art to create spaces of resistance and affirmation and economies of community cultural wealth and support. She is a graphic designer and illustrator, a textile rasquache-based public artist. She runs her own freelance and design education practice, Corazón Contento, based out of Brownsville, Texas. She is a co-founder of Las Imaginistas and works as an adjunct lecturer at the School of Art at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Nansi has been awarded residencies, fellowships, and grants from the NEA, Artplace America, A Blade of Grass, NALAC, and most recently, the Santa Fe Art Institute Artist Residency. Please give a warm welcome to our guest speaker. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, folks, for sharing this space with me today. I am excited to share my work and just talk to you folks. I don't think I talked to any humans today, so today yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Give folks a second. Awesome. Yeah, so like Elena said, I am living and working in Brownsville. I've been here for about 5 years. I'm from Laredo. I grew up in Laredo, left for college. So I was born and raised in Laredo, Texas. So if folks don't know, so Laredo and Brownsville are like at the very south of Texas. They're both border cities. Laredo is more like southwest, and then Brownsville is like the southernmost city in Texas. So if you look at a map and if you look at like the southernmost tip, that's Brownsville. And so yeah, I kind of wanted to just the reason I called it Making Art That Centers Home is I've been in all my years of making art, I've always done things that felt connected to me and also explorations of where I come from, right? And I don't mean home in just a geographic sense or place, right? I mean home in that I also found home with people, right? So from Laredo, I studied in Austin, and then I spent a year in Mexico City. And then I went to the East Coast. It was really cold there. Did my graduate school in Boston. And so I found a wonderful community of folks in every place, and they made me feel at home, right? So home can be a place, people, your community, your chosen family, your family, and even your passion, right? Because when I make art, I feel like I'm at home, like just like drawing or painting. I'm like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. um, so I mean home in that sense. So I just wanted to share my story with you. As I was doing the presentation in the morning, I was like looking at my hard drive, and I was like looking at all these images, and these images are from when I was in high school in Laredo. And the first like art class I took in Laredo was when I was in ninth grade. And Laredo has this like magnet school specifically for fine arts. And so I started painting in that class. Then my art teacher, Mr. Jorge Vasquez, who did a lot of community organizing during the 60s, he was like Chicano movement. He was teaching me about the Chicano movement and Chicano art. He was kind of like, hey, do you want to go paint a mural? We're going to go paint a mural. And I was like, at first I was like, no, like maybe they're not gonna let me. And then he kept telling me, he's like, you should come paint a mural. And so this is a picture of some old like a trolley. I don't know what it's called. I forgot the word. But it's like the thing that holds the trolley, old trolley in Laredo. But this, for me, like being outdoors, being in my community, being like looking at where like the surface we were painting on, the walls, and just painting outside was really activating for me. It was really different than painting inside for me. Like I was like already kind of painting on canvas, right? But this was just like really kind of sparked something in me that I was like, I really like this. And so I really saw possibility. And this is why I kind of shared this image, right? Because it's like public space. Yeah, and that feeling of like creating something in possibility. So this is one of the very back ones, and kind of, we were able to paint some of the history, right, of the trolley and like the early 1900s, right, in Laredo. And so we also got to learn about some of the history of our place. And so this contrasted with the images that we were so used to seeing on a daily, right? And Laredo's a border city. Laredo has border patrol. It's heavily militarized, like it is, or surveyed also, like it is in Brownsville. So a lot of our visual, like what we were taking in visually was, okay, it wasn't typical to see a border patrol van like driving through our neighborhoods, right? It was just like a thing to go through checkpoints. We would go to San Antonio, there was a checkpoint. This border patrol would ask, are you a US citizen? And our parents were like, you say US citizen, you don't say American citizen, right? Because America is like all of Latin America. So you have to say this. And so we were already like kind of like programmed, right? And so you can imagine like seeing all these images, right? And these are current works that I did this last year. but just seeing, you know, even officers, right, and this idea of the border patrol, and like, imagine also like growing up, right, like me as a child, and really not understanding. So like, we're Mexican, but like some people from Mexico can't come over here, but like why are we different than them? Like, confused, right? Very confusing. So this not only like activated me and like my passion for like public art and being in community, right? But it also presented like this very different image of us. Like this, what we painted, right? Mr. Vasquez was like, hey, have you heard of Cesar Chavez? Have you heard of Emiliano Zapata, right? We took pictures of ballet folklorico dancers, which you see on top of me in that picture. That's me and my little sister. She's also an artist. But you can imagine that, like, okay, the images that are being reflected here on this mural are very different than the images I see just or in the neighborhood with all this policing, right? In La Mira. And so this is where I learned about farm workers. This is where I learned about Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. Also things like the cultural importance of La Virgen de Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe, right? Not just as a religious symbol, but just like as a cultural symbol of like faith, right? And a symbol that we needed also on the border. Things like the accordion, right? Like the tradition of the accordion being used in a lot of music, Tejano, Conjunto, in South Texas. The matachin, also like the indigenous dancer. And so for me, at this point, I was already, I feel like this is like when I started getting more like politicized, is that like, for me, I was like, okay, so this image, I feel like this image is more accurate, right? And so then I started to question like the whole system, right, of border policy, of border patrol, of even the border, right? A lot of questioning, a lot of learning about my identity as a young person. You know, from here, I decided to, oh, this is a nice quote that I found. Let me just, my computer did something. Okay, yeah. So this is something that my teacher wrote to describe the mural. So it says, El Azteca mural invites us, the viewer, to participate in the magic of reality, just as the figures are representing real people standing just outside the frame add their contribution to the flow of creation and recreation of place, neighborhood, and shared history. So also that idea of like, yeah, my teacher had experienced the 60s and the movement, right? And how important it was for him to pass down that information to us as young people in Laredo, right? And so we're all kind of co-creating together our place, our neighborhood. So from here, I was like, I understood also because of my teacher that I could study art. And so I moved to Austin, went to UT as an art major, and then decided to do the design program in Austin. So this work is like, during my time as a student, I was also started to take, you know, Mexican American studies, trying to understand my identity better. And so this is one of the first posters that I made, and really learning about like the journeys that families make to cross various borders, right? There's also folks from Central America that are crossing many borders, not just the Mexican in the US border. And also learning about US immigration policy, and really just trying to make sense of it all, right? And so these works that I'm going to show you are kind of like me also in the process of like learning about my place and about myself, and just like learning about everything, making sense of all my experiences, right, growing up in a place like Laredo. So yeah, also learning about so during that time, it was also my first time going to Mexico, and really not just the border of like Mexico, which I was used to going to Nuevo Laredo, which is the border of Laredo on the Mexican side. Um, pero I was able to go in more of in central Mexico, and really that process for me was like, okay, then I understood, okay, there seems to be an extraction of like of culture on the border, right? Not because we there's these very strong racial narratives, right, that work to even justify us having a border and having uh, such a militarized and policed border, right? And so what happens is that some of the things that I didn't know about my own culture, which is like Mexican culture, both of my parents are from Mexico, I'm first generation. Um, and so there was a lot of reflection on like cultural kind of extraction that happens, this pressure to assimilate, right, as like uh, immigrants, as first generation folks, and also like history of colonization. So this kind of shows like kind of intergenerational family. This is a piece that I did in Mexico, and was trying to kind of make sense and learn about that history in Mexico, the Spanish conquest, that the so in the center of Mexico City, there is like a really big Catholic church. And then at the like right on the side of it is where there's a pyramid, right? But it's kind of like what's left of the pyramid. And so I was thinking a lot about, because there was like a tour, and they mentioned that the Spanish used some of the material from a lot of the material from the pyramids to build the Catholic Church that is right next to it, right? And so I was thinking a lot about that image of like ruins, right? And also the current reality of like indigenous and Black folks in Mexico, right? And kind of like the marginalization of indigenous people also in Mexico. So this one, also in the making sense of everything, I like this one because I was also in Mexico as I was trying to figure out more of my identity, I was like, oh, okay, there was a lot of like, oh, you speak Spanish differently, or like, so this idea, if you read Gloria Anzaldúa, or if you watched like that Selena movie, like not being Mexican enough, or not being like US American enough. And so I was like, I get a lot of my identity and my culture from my mom, right? And so this piece kind of arose from that, like mi madre, mi matria, right? My mother, my nation. So also like pushing back against this idea of like nationalism, right? And borders, but really saying like, oh, I attribute this, like everything that I learned, traditions, everything, to my mother. And then after my time in Boston, I decided to move back to South Texas. I had never been to Brownsville. I moved, and it was like my first time here. It's also a border city. And so I was like, this became kind of my reconnection as well. So I learned about my community. I learned about community here. I met community organizers. I met women that have been organizing here for a really long time. This is a fabric piece that I made for exhibit for Mexicarte. And that was when I met Elena also. She invited me to be a part of this show. But really, I was really trying to represent the power that I saw, right? Because I left so young from Laredo, 18, it was also interesting to like experience the South Texas border as an adult, like after doing all these things and being out there, right? And coming back. And so meeting these amazing women and just learning from them, right? This is Dina Nunez, and she's like an amazing activist that's been working for such a long time. And I met her because I wanted to create an artwork with her, kind of telling the story of like how she came to activism, like how she came to organizing. When did she start organizing? Like why, right? So then we kind of created this like this piece together, right? She started organizing from having had a lot of difficult experiences as a migrant, right? With working as a domestic worker. And so she started, she also teaches these Know Your Rights workshops. And so she can tell you like all the rights that immigrants and undocumented peoples have in the US. So she does all this community work around that. So then this is the piece that we kind of designed together, right? Kind of flipping machismo, like patriarchy and her kind of, in taking power and teaching knowing her rights, but also teaching knowing your rights to other community members. So this is a fabric piece version of it. And so I started getting more and more into fabric. Growing up, my mom taught me how to sew with the sewing machine. She worked at a factory for a little bit, sewing, and I just felt really connected to fabric. And I really wanted to keep exploring this, like, women and the work that we do in our homes, because a lot of the organizing that happens in people's homes, right? And also the images and the faith that goes with organizing, but also like doing the work every day, really difficult work, really difficult social justice work, and just fighting for humanity, right? And the spirituality and faith that comes with that. And so really want to make sure to differentiate. I'm not talking about a specific religion, but just faith and spirituality in general. So these are my ladies. This is my mom and my grandma, and they're amazing. They're strong. My mom, like I said, sewed. She also worked at a hospital. My grandma was a street vendor for a really long time. My mom also was a street vendor when she was a youth. She helped my grandma. Also, my great grandparents were street vendors. And so I have 3 generations of folks that have worked as street vendors in Mexico to make a living and sustain their families. And so a little bit later in my time in Brownsville, I started this project with 2 other artists, Celeste de Luna and Christina Huel, called Taller de Permiso, right? So just briefly, street vending is not legal in Brownsville, right? And so we see with the national conversation on LA and LA street vendors and legalizing street vending there. And so we really started this project to start that conversation, right? There's a lot of people here that have informal businesses that work out of their homes, and they do this. There's a lot of people that do this work to sustain their families. So ambulante in Spanish is street vendor. So it's street vendor power. This work was created by Krista Juarez, who also lives in Brownsville. And so really doing work with creative placemaking and making these, working also directly with vendors and community organizing and seeing what the needs were from community vendors. And this is a vendor bicycle. And during that project, we made this kind of mobile, long table, like kind of like a dinner table. And during that project, we also had several markets where vendors could come and sell their stuff, and they were set up with all the permitting, right? So really using kind of objects and images to lift up the cultural wealth and sensibilities of street vendors. I'm going to show you all a video next. One second.
Honorable tradition of the Day of the Dead, a mixture, a blending of cultures in Mesoamerica and the Spanish traditions. If you have a photograph, a picture of a relative that you would like to place in the altar, you're welcome to do so. And we are going to do our walk to the cemetery. Whoever wants to join us, we're going to walk to the cemetery and then back as a way of a procession. And we will continue with our program.
Este es el primer día que hacemos un evento grande, si se puede decir, lo del programa de taller de permiso. Este es un programa que ayuda a las comunidades a emprender pequeños negocios. En esta vez yo traje tostadas de bolsa. Vienen con su limón, su...
This is an opening, a blessing for welcoming this honorable tradition of the Day of the Dead, a mixture, a blending of cultures in Mesoamerica and the Spanish traditions. If you have a photograph, a picture of a relative that you would like to place in the altar, you're welcome to do so. And we are going to do our walk to the cemetery. Whomever wants to join us, we're going to walk to the cemetery and then back as a way of a procession. And we will continue with our program.
Este es el primer día que hacemos un evento grande, si se puede decir, lo del programa de taller de permiso. Este es un programa que ayuda a las comunidades a emprender pequeños negocios. En esta vez yo traje tostadas de bolsa. Vienen con su limón, su salsa, su queso. La gente tiene muchísimas ideas de qué vender, de cosas de qué preparar, pero hay veces que no podemos. Entonces es muy bonito este programa porque te ayudan a todo.
Pues es una forma de poder ayudarnos en la economía de nosotros y darle a conocer a la gente las raíces de los mexicanos, de los latinos. Pues es importante para levantar económicamente la ciudad y darle más importancia a las mujeres.
Yo me metí a este programa por apoyar a la comunidad, como darle la oportunidad a todo el mundo de emprender un pequeño negocio o grande. Salsa, su queso. La gente tiene muchísimas ideas de qué vender, de cosas de qué preparar, pero hay veces que no podemos. Entonces es muy bonito este programa porque te ayudan a todo.
Pues es una forma de poder ayudarnos en la economía de nosotros y darle a conocer a la gente las raíces de los mexicanos, de los latinos. Pues es importante para levantar económicamente la ciudad y darle más importancia a las mujeres.
Yo me metí a este programa por apoyar a la comunidad, como darle la oportunidad a todo el mundo de emprender un pequeño negocio o grande.
So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Yeah, so that program really trying to support vendors in their needs, and really there's a lot of like people that want to start their small business, and so also looking at city politics around. So there is a lot of talk of like economic development, right? So then we really focused on centering street vendors as a way to for economic development, right? That didn't have to do, there was more grassroots and more about what people wanted to do, right? Versus kind of corporate or investors outside folks. And so I'm going to share also, so there's another project called Hacemos la Ciudad. I'm going to go ahead and play that video next. Share the screen.
Brownsville is on the southernmost tip of Texas. It's sort of wedged in between the Gulf of Mexico and Mexico, and right across is Matamoros. It's a binational space. It's bilingual.
I think about this idea of like migrants really being the experts of dreaming, and we're kind of following that legacy.
Thank you so much. So our project that we're presenting to you all is a project that we've made in collaboration with over 200 members in the city, where we've engaged with them in a practice of dreaming and asking what it is that we want to see for the future of our region.
The city was named the lowest income city in the United States. We're also in the heart of the immigration crisis.
Seeing that border wall every day, it's a strong image of hate and violence.
How does the border wall impact our consciousness? How does the architecture in a space impact my perception of myself? And how does it also dictate to me what I think is possible and what I think is not possible? The history of the region is very much framed around the colonizer, and it ignores and erases everything that comes before.
We collected objects. We invited people in the community to donate what we call chucherias, objects that were kind of laying around in their home.
And then the way that those objects are painted and arranged is representative of the different ideas that people had about what the future of the region would look like. We worked with 3 communities. We think of the city as one community. We think of artists, thought leaders, academics, nonprofit leaders as another community. And then we think of individuals working to make change in their neighborhood as a third community. If you're going to think about how to change a geography, it has to take into account the implications of everyone in that geography. We heard people wanting to see the built environment reflect them, people wanting to see streets named after cultural leaders.
People are craving more spaces of gathering to build community, like the traditional plaza.
En esa maqueta estábamos ahí visualizando qué es lo que queremos, cómo queremos que sea la ciudad de Brownsville. Poniendo en esa maqueta qué es específicamente lo que nosotros necesitamos.
What we heard from residents was that they wanted to have more opportunities for ideas and people to move back and forth between the two sides. You can see we have many different bridges where people can cross freely from one country to the other. This is a currently vacant building, and one of the things that we imagined was that this would be a mixed income housing space.
It's not just imagining, it's imagining and action. It's imagining and change. It's imagining and reimagining. Asking the question of how do they want to respond? How do we want to respond?
¿Listos, soñadores? ¿Quiénes somos?
Somos dueños
¿Dueños de qué?
de nuestros sueños.
¿Quiénes somos?
Somos dueños. ¿Dueños de qué? De nuestros sueños.
¿Quiénes somos?
Somos dueños.
¿Dueños de qué?
De nuestros sueños.
¿Qué queremos? En realidad nosotros cuando llegamos a este país, llegamos con muchos sueños. Muchos de nosotros llegamos solo con lo que traíamos puesto. Entonces, por eso es tan importante el trabajo de las imaginistas. Porque entonces nosotros, con el apoyo de ellas, estamos dando forma a esos sueños con los que nosotros llegamos y que nos tarda muchas veces años en hacerlo realidad.
We are so grateful to have with us some of the actual community members who participate in these sectors.
With everything that's going on, especially all the construction downtown, there's concerns of our community.
We could list for hours the number of community development problems any individual here is experiencing. The people who came to the event today, miraculously, are people who are working nearly 24 hours around the clock to respond to different urgent needs of the community. They took the time out of their day to come to this art event because it is relevant to them.
Being able to imagine and kind of dream of something better is a crucial part of the work.
If the community says what we need art to do is to make change, then that is art. And that is the community defining art on their own terms. Understanding what it means to live in extreme poverty, what it means to live in a part of the country that is being expressly ignored by the federal government. If you want art to include those communities, then you have to ask those communities, what does art mean to you?
Brownsville is on the southernmost tip of Texas. It's sort of wedged in between the Gulf of Mexico and Mexico. And right across is Matamoros. It's a binational space. It's bilingual.
I think about this idea of like migrants really being the experts of dreaming. And we're kind of following that legacy.
Thank you so much. So our project project that we're presenting to you all is a project that we've made in collaboration with over 200 members in the city, where we've engaged with them in a practice of dreaming and asking what it is that we want to see for the future of our region.
The city was named the lowest income city in the United States. We're also in the heart of the immigration crisis.
Seeing that border wall every day, it's a strong image of hate and violence.
How does the border wall impact our consciousness? How does the architecture in a space impact my perception of myself? And how does it also dictate to me what I think is possible and what I think is not possible? The history of the region is very much framed around the colonizer, and it ignores and erases everything that comes before.
We collected objects. We invited people in the community to donate what we call chucherias, objects that were kind of laying around in their home.
And then the way that those objects are painted and arranged is representative of the different ideas that people had about what the future of the region would look like. We worked with 3 communities. We think of the city as one community. We think of artists, thought leaders, academics, nonprofit leaders as another community. And then we think of individuals working to make change in their neighborhood as a 3rd community. Going to think about how to change geography, it has to take into account the implications of everyone in that geography. We heard people wanting to see the built environment reflect them, people wanting to see streets named after cultural leaders.
People are craving more spaces of gathering to build community, like the traditional plaza.
En esa maqueta estábamos ahí visualizando qué es lo que queremos, cómo queremos que sea la ciudad de Brownsville, poniendo en esa maqueta qué es específicamente lo que nosotros necesitamos.
What we heard from residents was that they wanted to have more opportunities for ideas and people to move back and forth between the 2 sides. You can see we have many different bridges where people can cross freely from one country to the other. This is a currently vacant building, and one of the things that we imagined was that this would be a mixed income housing space.
It's not just imagining, it's imagining and action. It's imagining and change. It's imagining and reimagining. Asking the question of how do they want to respond? How do we want to respond?
En realidad nosotros cuando llegamos a este país, llegamos con muchos sueños. Muchos de nosotros llegamos solo con lo que traíamos puesto. Entonces, por eso es tan importante el trabajo de las imaginistas, porque entonces nosotros, con el apoyo de ellas, estamos dando forma a esos sueños con los que nosotros llegamos y que nos tarda muchas veces años en hacerlo realidad.
We are so grateful to have with us some of the actual community members who participate.
So I'll stop it there. So Hacemos la Ciudad was a year project where so the city has all these plans, right? And when urban kind of city planning happens, there is very little, often very little community feedback or presentations to community. And so this project was really a way to use art and community organizing to ask folks like, okay, there's a lot of talk about economic development, about revitalization of downtown, of just development, right? What are your ideas? Like, how do you see progress and development happening here? Like, what do you want for the future of your families? So that project really was like a full year of a series of workshops where we gathered kind of community input of what their visions were for the future of Brownsville. I'm going to share my screen again. Saying the Virgen is like all of us, right? The Virgen represents the people. She doesn't represent like the elite, like high class, right? It's always, the Virgen has always represented the people. And so throughout this year also, so Monica Sosa, a good friend of mine, Sandra Trevino, a good friend of mine, we put together this mutual aid for street vendors. And so we were able to raise 5,000 and kind of distribute it amongst 5,500, distributed between like 11 street vendor families, more towards the beginning of the pandemic, and really pushing that idea of mutual aid, right? Like a lot of what happens in our community is that we support each other, right? We call each other, like we share resources, we share rides, right? We donate to each other. So really pushing this idea of like supporting each other in community. The one on the right, I made the graphic for a good friend named Marta Lucia Mercado. And they are organizing a mutual aid fund for the Pulga vendors. So Pulga is kind of like a flea market. It's a big market here in Brownsville. So they are fundraising 10,000 to give to vendors that are part of the Pulga. And so really supporting small, not only like small businesses, right, but micro businesses, like informal businesses, like businesses of like 1 or 2 people, right? So the mutual aid information is there in case you want to donate. They accept Venmo and Cash App. And so another thing that's been kind of being talked about more now is the presence of SpaceX in Brownsville. And so SpaceX is this big company owned by Elon Musk, who also owns Tesla. And so they just moved to a beach called Boca Chica Beach in Brownsville. And so this poster is kind of, so really, when focusing on like local economic development and really focusing on the families, right, that have been here for generations, low-income families, this area, like Laredo, also has a large amount of like low-income folks and families, right? And so really pushing this, like, no, we need equitable, we need economic justice. We need economic justice here, and really critiquing also on the city level. The county gave SpaceX about 10 years of tax breaks. They really have kind of taken over that area, and now they want to expand, right? And so really speaking out against gentrification and the displacement that will happen if the city doesn't prepare or has any strategies or plans in place for the large amounts of people that could potentially move here because of this new kind of space economy that is happening and is very, very supported by the local city in Brownsville. So there's a lot of community organizers, right, that are talking about it, that are kind of spreading this information about, what it means for a billionaire and $1 billion company to move into the border in one of the poorest areas of the country, and what's going to happen to housing for people, right? So I just wanted to share some of because I've been writing about this and kind of talking about it. I've also, given interviews about it. But I really wanted to read this also as a way for you folks to understand that also is a very important place for a lot of families in Brownsville. There's a lot of folks that go to that beach with their families. And so La Boca del Rio flows into the ocean, releasing all its tension and pain into the vastness of the sea. This is a healing place. This is a sacred land. This is Estocna land, or Carrizo Come Crudo tribe land. Boca Chica is an oasis, a space that provides grounding and clarity, a point that helps us understand that calm is possible. So that beach, also where SpaceX decided to build their launch site, also has the delta. So it's where the river flows into the ocean. And then we continue to survive in a militarized system that calls us criminals, who views us as cheap labor, who profits off of our bodies and deaths. The delta water embraces us. It tells us we belong. The river grounds us and assures us we are home. And so really protecting, right, that home that we all share, right? The Boca Chica is a very special place for a lot of people in Brownsville, and it holds a lot of memories. And so right now it's in danger of, so SpaceX wants to expand their launch site. There's been talk about privatizing the beach. There has been like a disturbance to local wildlife. It's also hard to access the beach. Whenever they have a launch site, it's completely closed, and then it's closed for like a series of days because they have to clean up all the debris from the explosions. There's already been 3 rockets that have exploded. And so, and then lastly, I want to see my community, the families and their children, be set up in a place where they can pursue their purpose, their dream, and what they love. And then lastly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I'm working on currently, and then we can go to questions. I know I'm running a little bit late. So NALAC, which is a national arts organization, partnered up with the Ford Foundation. That's also a national foundation. And they are doing this Changing Border Narratives initiative, or reclaiming the border narrative. And so it's been very helpful to kind of also look back at like, you know, so many years of work, and also working to change the narratives, right, of the border. But this project, Yali E, the Magic Valley, so I've gotten more into like children's books, children's literature, right, storytelling, and really changing the story, like creating these counter narratives and creating and telling our own stories. And so this is going to be a short animation series that takes place in this area. So it'll have like the landscape of this area, and really the purpose of it is to kind of show our place and our culture and our connection to our land, right? And amongst other things, this is still a work in progress. I am currently brainstorming and writing. And so it's very exciting because it's also kind of me going from like still image to more of a moving image. And that's always been very interesting to me, and something that I've been wanting to try. So I'll stop it there, y'all. If folks have any questions, I'm here. I think we have like 10 minutes, ¿verdad?
Thank you, Nancy. That was fantastic. And I just made sure I set the security for you have the ability to unmute yourself. So if you want to have a direct ask a direct question instead of using the chat box. If you are shy, you're welcome to use the chat box, and we could do that as well. Okay, do you have any advice for artists that want to support creative communities without supporting gentrification?
Yeah, great question. I would say like it's that's a great question. I would say it's really like getting to know people in the community. Like I love being in community and I just like love talking to people and like making things with people. And so my view or approach isn't like kind of like a bird's eye view of like everyone. It's more like, oh, let's hang out, or like someone will be like, really listening to like what folks in the community want to do and kind of connecting your project, like your ideas with their ideas and kind of like mixing, right? I mean, you're right in the sense that like art has also been used to kind of like, gentrify. That's why it's really important to have like a genuine and good connection with community, and especially if you're not from that place, right? You just kind of chill, right? Get to know people, get to know what's happening, learn, like learn about the history, learn about what's happening, the issues that are important to people. More take a seat and like learn. I like honestly, my process is like, because I have done projects in other places, and like really my process now is like it's a little bit more fluid and organic, I would say, because it's really, and it comes from also years of being somewhere, right? Like you can't just move somewhere and like the first year you're like, I want to do, like really taking the time to like learn and listen. Does that answer your question?
And
Ow.
Nancy, I think you also have your boots on the ground in both territories, because not only are you very rooted in the community and you spend your time learning the community and listening, but you also have your historical knowledge and background from your education, and you do your research. Everything you just said about SpaceX, I was like, that was all like facts, that this is what's happening and this is what could possibly happen. And we've already seen this happen in other places. And I think that's what makes your work so powerful, is because you're coming at it from both sides. You are doing the work on both sides, the research and the community, which thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that with us. I think that is the example of how to do art projects with gentrification, anti-gentrification in mind. So thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I also like I learned all these like research and educational ways also, like in like I learned that in school, but I also learned so much from like my mom and my community in Laredo, and like my like that has like that community cultural wealth, like they don't teach you in school, right? And so it's like really using the power and the tools that like are that are from home, right, that are natural to you, or something that you learn from your community, and then learning the tools of like this like of like research institutions, and like I could and it's really learning all these tools and learning all these languages to like navigate these different places. And like when I first, like my first year in college, I was like, I didn't understand a lot of social norms, like as a student, like in Austin, away from Laredo. So I'm like, all that I had to learn, like as if also as a like first generation like college student, which all of us are, I have 4 sisters, there's 5 of us. So that's something, if you're a first generation in this country and a first generation in college, you have to learn all these things, but also don't let go of like what you already know, like what you already learned from your family and from your community, because that is really important también also.
Well, that's super touching commentary, since you went to some of the most prestigious schools in the country as a first generation college student. So, I mean, UT Austin and Harvard. It's amazing what you've been able to accomplish and what you're able to share with us today through those experiences. And I know our audience is very far, about 2,000 plus miles from the border. So everything you share with us about the border community experience, we're learning from your presentation, and you've coming at it from both the Laredo and the Brownsville side. I've been very blessed to do studio visits and have become acquainted with both cities from my time in Texas, and they're amazing communities. And I know if you have not visited a border city before, you wouldn't know how to describe it. And I think you would have to live there for a good number of years to even understand the magic that the place of cultural connections, of the dialogue between across these fictitious borders in such a space. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry, I'm just rambling, you guys, because I enjoy Nancy's conversation. Do you have any other questions in the audience? Does any of the students have questions?
Yeah. How do you get the ball rolling on like community projects and that kind of thing?
Cool. So I'll give you an example with a project I did in Boston, because Boston, I mean, it's like the East Coast, right? I was also like, oh my gosh, the East Coast, like, I don't know, like, but it was really like, so I did an artist residency in Boston, and it was also part of an Artplace project. And I was an artist resident to some schools there, and so I was tasked to like work in a particular neighborhood and then work within the schools, right? And so I just was like, okay, let me pick a school. Like, it's a high school. Then I just kind of spend time with the art teacher and spend time with the students, and really went from there. And then later learned like, hey, like we were thinking of doing this mural in this like hallway, right? So we just designed it and we made it. Really just also focusing, that's why I like also studied education, because it's like really focusing on like education and students and just like painting with people, right? It doesn't need to become this like, I know that like the art world has like specific standards sometimes and it's like confusing, right? But it's really about like self-expression for people and just like making art with people. So getting the ball rolling, more specifically, I know like time is a thing, but it's not good to rush so much in community work. That's what I've learned. Like, don't rush it. Just like, and I know it's hard because sometimes we get residencies or sometimes we get grants, right? But really learning how to be like strategic with time and really also letting things happen, right? Because it's not like, I'm like, you can't rush everything. You can't rush. And I know like the pace of our country, you know, and like capitalism is so fast, but it takes time to build with people. And like, it's genuine. It's like genuine building, right? It's not like a superficial building. And it's just really enjoying kind of like the process. I'm like, doing this like yoga teacher training right now, and we're learning like yoga, like all the theory, right? And so one of the things is like, don't be so attached to like the results, like focus on the process. And like I've really been trying to like repeat that as an artist, right? Because we do care about the result and how it's going to look, right, and everything, like the aesthetics and everything, but also like enjoy the process, and like there's a lot of learning that happens there. And with community work, it's like a lot of like being present, enjoying the process of doing something. And it could be something, it doesn't, and I also am like, you don't have to make anything super elaborate. Like I'm down to like go paint a mural with folks, or like let's build something like a sculpture for like this sculpture garden, or sometimes I go volunteer at like the community garden and I just help the farmer, like just tell me what you need and I'll do it, right? And so really showing up for folks also. Does that kind of answer it, or did I confuse? Yeah, that's good. Awesome.
That sounds like fantastic advice about not rushing it with the community projects when you're thinking about the project you did about visualizing the city of the future of Brownsville. If people were not relaxed and having fun, if they were rushed and on a rigid timeline, you don't have the space for creativity and imagination for things that don't even exist yet in the city. So that's a beautiful example of not rushing community work. But I know a lot of times we're on grants and timelines for the grants and the reporting. But I know you have a lot of experience with that too, as a lot of you've won some pretty fantastic opportunities for Brownsville. You do a lot of giving back to the community, which is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time for something to, you imagine something and then it takes time to actually like materialize it also. Like it's something that's going to take time. And yeah. And I mean, all of these projects have been also like collaborations, right? So like shout out to everyone that I've worked with. Because I mean, it's I love like also like groups of two. I'm like you're like working in groups of 2 or 3. I like small groups anyways. Yeah, but it's cool like working and sharing and like collaborating with people. Yeah, it's fun. But if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I think we can leave it here, or do you folks have more time?
Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but we'll give them a minute if they have any others. And I just want to say one more thing that super resonated with me, your comment of passion being your home as well. It could be a locale, it could be people, but it could be the passion that you're driven by. Nancy, this was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your work with the community here at PCA&D and the City of Lancaster. So we really appreciate your time and visiting us at the Pennsylvania College of Art and Design.
See, thank you all for inviting me, and it was good to talk to y'all and share space. Yeah, thank you all. And you can if you want to see more of my work, nancyguevara.com, or I also am on Instagram, so you can kind of follow my work there. But thank you folks, I love doing this and I love talking to students, and y'all are awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And if anyone is joining us here tonight from outside the PCA&D community, follow Nancy on Instagram and also pcad.edu for our upcoming programs and next events from the gallery and beyond. Well, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.